A manufacturing plant in the Midwest had to shut down an entire production area because someone reported a suspicious chemical cloud drifting across the floor. People backed away, alarms were raised, and supervisors ran over in full emergency mode. Turns out it actually wasn't a chemical cloud at all. It was flour. A single 50-pound bag ripped, slowly leaking from the forklift line, drifting like a haunted fog across everything. No PPE breach, no toxic exposure. It was just flour. But here's the thing, the response revealed way more than the incident itself. It showed gaps in communication, training blind spots, and how fast assumptions spread when systems aren't tight. And that's exactly what our episode is about today, the workplace incidences that you've never heard of, the weird ones, the why is it my job moments, and the surprisingly important lessons that teach us about safety culture, process discipline, and human behavior. And to help me break these down, I've got not just one, but two seasoned EHS practitioners with me, people who have led programs, seen the strange and then the unbelievable, and lived to tell the stories. Welcome back to the Safety Brief. I am Monika, joined by always my co host Scott. And today we're also joined by Scott. Two Scotts on one podcast. That's definitely not confusing. But in all seriousness, this is a treat because both Scotts have decades of hands on experience in EHS, operations, and everything in between. They've seen the good, the bad, the bizarre, the kinds of workplace moments that you truly can't mess up. So, Scott Gerard, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure, and just delighted to be here. But I'm Scott Gerard. I'm an intellects consultant inside our Center of Excellence now, but I spent the last 35 years as an EHS practitioner, worked in a variety of fields, industrial manufacturing, construction, energy. Mr. Gaddis might say I couldn't hold a job. That's why I've got so much exposure to so many different areas, but just a wide range of industries I've worked in, and really looking forward to today's topic.
Amazing. Happy to have you here. And Scott G, my co host, do you want to give the listeners just a quick reminder of your credentials?
Yeah, so Vice President Safety and Health here at NLX. But before that, Scott and I go back a long, long way. We have literally worked very close together for a lot of years. But I was the global leader for Kimberly-Clark and Bristol Myers Squibb for safety and health and environmental work. But I started actually life as a site level practitioner at GE. So we both
Wow.
have about the same years of experience, and a lot of weird things have happened on our watch. So we are primed for this discussion.
Can't wait to dive in. That's going to be exciting. All right. So let's jump into today's topic. I've pulled four examples of the weirdest workplace incidences you've probably never heard of. These are the kinds of stories that make you shake your head, laugh, or question how it even happened. But they actually do teach us a ton about safety culture and how incidences really happen. And of course, before we dive in, Scott squared. As practitioners, you already know this, but for our listeners, every story we're sharing today is based on real incidents taken from industry cases and firsthand experience. So naturally, names, companies, locations are going to be anonymous for a reason. So without further ado, let's jump into the first story, which is called The Exploding Safety Glasses. So imagine this, you're on a production floor, minding your business, and suddenly pop, one of your coworkers' safety glasses shoots off their face like a slingshot. Then another one pops, and another. People think there's a pressure issue. Someone even wonders if there's a chemical reaction with the plastic. The EHS team is trying to stay calm, but meanwhile, these safety glasses are flying off faces like some kind of bizarre workplace whack-a-mole. Turns out, though, it's not a chemical hazard. It's not a system failure either. It's just a bad batch of safety glasses where the frames shrank when exposed to heat, creating enough pressure to launch themselves outward. So, what I got from the lesson here was that it wasn't even about the eyewear, it was about supplier quality and trust. Even PPE needs incoming inspection, and that a tiny oversight upstream causes chaos downstream. But what do you guys think from your practitioner perspectives?
Oh boy, I'm going to bet we both have a comment about this. But the first thing that I would say, I've never had this specific problem in one of my facilities. However, I have had plenty of problems with the procurement function at the sites that I managed when I was in a corporate role, leading some of that work with procurement, because procurement is always trying to be very efficient and protect the resources of the company, which usually means how can I find the cheapest PPE that's on the market that I can buy? And many times, right, that's exactly what happens. Now, I think Scott's going to agree with me is that when we look at PPE, we're looking at quality, we are looking at protection level, we're looking at comfort. We are actually looking to see if that person will actually wear what we're asking them to put on, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into that decision. But as you can imagine, sometimes our cost, right, are exorbitantly high compared to what procurement can actually buy that for. So if I had to guess, right, what happened in this case, I'm going to guess that procurement went for the cheapest option that was available and they bought it. Scott, what do you think?
No, I think you're spot on. And I actually pranked one of my managers one time with exactly this. The procurement team was going for the low cost, high volume purchase. The gear didn't fit anybody. It didn't really protect anybody. And we were building a new manufacturing plant, and my manager didn't have a lot of construction experience. And I was really the construction safety person. So he came out to the plant site one day dressed in a suit, right? We're deep in cut and fill. So we're moving dirt and mud all around the site. So comes out in a suit, and he never brought his PPE that we provided to him, but he was always looking for ways to cut corners on costs. So we got some of the it's almost novelty PPE, Scott. So we got him an oversized hard hat. It was about 50% bigger than it should have been. Put him in goggles, put him in a vest that was lime green. I mean, it was the brightest green vest I've ever seen. It was about 2.5 times too big for him. Had him blouse his pants into his boots and told him to go sit out on the gator on the four-wheel drive open air vehicle that we were going to tour the plant site with. And by the time he got out there, we had drawn a crowd. So people were just like,
Yeah.
just really having a good time with the way we had dressed up the manager. And we really kind of made a point with, hey, PPE's not only got to be of the right caliber, right? Of the right quality, of protecting for the right hazards, but it's got to fit and it's got to look good. If you don't look good in the PPE, people are going to reject it and they're not going to wear it. So, that's kind of a funny story that's always stuck with me. And I think to this day, 20 some
Yeah.
years later, he's never forgiven me for what I did to him. But it was a
Well,
good.
Monica, I would say this, right? There's a serious side about this story, because Scott and I, we do see this quite often, and I know every listener is going to actually look back at this and say, "Yep, that's happened to us." But I can remember back when I started, PPE didn't come in a lot of sizes, right? So you had this size, and if it was a Tyvek coverall or a Durafab coverall. Usually it was manufactured thinking about a man, right, in the work environment. So you would have gloves, you would have glasses, you would have hard hats, all basically built for a male. And I can remember this like yesterday is that I had a smaller statured female employee that was wearing a pair of gloves that I had assigned to her, and she came back and she was very bold. She slapped me across the face with those gloves, and she shook them in my face and said, "Who bought these gloves?" Right? And of course I did. I bought the gloves and didn't think anything about it, right? Less SKUs, right? All of those kind of things that we buy for. But they didn't fit her. And actually, her wearing those gloves was really more unsafe than it was if she didn't have gloves on at all. So that was a real big lesson for me is things got to fit. They have to be made thinking about the genders that are in your workforce. They have to look good, right? So fashion is a part of believe it or not, of PPE. And so all of those things kind of go into that. So when I say that procurement would drive me crazy in some of these discussions, it is important to be able to prove even ROI, back to procurement and say, well, this is why, right, that we need to make that decision.
Scott, that reminds me of a quick glove story, and that is, again, when I
A love
started,
story.
gloves were gloves,
Oh, a
right?
glove story.
A
Yeah.
glove story, not a love story, the glove story.
Love story of
And
gloves.
Yeah, and you got to love your gloves, right? But gloves were gloves, and you used to buy just the jersey glove, and they were 98 cents, and you bought them by the gross. And we were having hand injuries with a particular crew doing a particular job on our building construction sites. And we went to the glove manufacturers and found a glove that was purpose built for that kind of activity. It was an impact resistant glove. So it had the exoskeleton on the outside. Kind of looked a little cool. It almost looked like the racing gloves that Dale Earnhardt Jr. used to wear with the Skeletor, on the outside of them.
Right.
And the guys loved them and they took care of them because they were kind of a symbol of pride. But the spend that we had for that particular glove, and they were expensive. They were $18 a pair, as I remember. But we started saving tens of thousands of dollars in injuries, right? So we're affecting work comp costs and claim costs, but we're also sending people home whole at the end of the day without
Right.
the hand injuries. So looking good and feeling good. As Fernando used to say, you it doesn't matter how you look or feel as long as you look good and you look marvelous. So you got to look marvelous in your PPE.
I think that's the important thing is you can't cut corners where it matters because that's where you'll feel it the most. At least that's what I got from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to take an active role. You got to take an active role between procurement, right, and especially the safety practitioner. So we've got a part of that to own, right? We just can't leave it all over to a group that's trying to be as efficient as they can, which I get that. But yeah, yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, jumping into the second story. This one kind of sounds like a movie scene, and I can't believe it's real, but about the spider that shut down an entire night shift. So,
Oh,
a facility kept getting overnight security alarms, motion sensors tripping between 1 and 3 a.m., and it happened so often that leadership started thinking someone was sneaking in after hours. EHS was called, maintenance was called, IT was called, but nobody could find the source. Finally, someone decided to put a camera on the motion detector to catch whatever is triggering it, and at 2:47 a.m., the culprit appeared. It was a single spider building its web across the sensor lens, waving its little legs and triggering alarms like it owned the place. And I think this one teaches us a surprising truth that not every root cause is mechanical. Sometimes the environment is the hazard, and this is why inspections need to look beyond equipment and humans, and also the importance of keeping up with your inspections. What do you guys think?
You, you know, it's almost as if we had prompted you with these topics, and to the audience, we had not. But this reminds me of another story, and I guess when you've been around as long as Scott and I have, you've got a story for every story. But building a manufacturing plant, and we got a bunch of fittings that had come in from Asia, as I remember, and a couple of cases of pipe fittings came in and they were full of brown recluse spiders. So as soon as they hit the building, they took off for the rafters.
No.
And we had we saw them. The iron workers don't want to work, the electricians don't want to work, the pipe fitters don't want to work in those areas because of the hazard of the brown recluse spiders. So I had to call an exterminator, and I said, "Hey, I need an exterminator out here. We've got brown recluse spiders." But back to procurement, I do kind of need a price to know what I'm dealing with here. I want to get three prices and be a good steward of the company's money. And they said, "Well, how big's the building?" I said, "Well, it's 1.4 million square feet." And they were like, "No, no, no, it can't be that big. That's the size of your entire plant site. How big's the building?" I said, "Well, it's 1.4 million square feet." And, and they wouldn't believe me. So we said, "Well, a bay is 400 by 400." So I had them price it by the bay, inside this big, huge manufacturing plant. And that's how we finally got pricing together to get these spiders out. But yeah, environmental factors and critters. I've worked a lot in solar construction for industrial scale solar facilities. So spiders, snakes, endangered species like the burrowing owl here in Florida. All those things are things that I never was taught in school. When I went to
mhm.
school to study environmental health and safety, nobody told me I would be counting spiders or horned owls or whatever it might be, and how to deal with those. So, Scott, I know you've got a story, and I just know you do.
Well, I do. I mean, I think again, because we've been around so long, we've all had spiders. We've all had critters that have jumped out of boxes that were not common to the places where we work. Anytime that you have raw materials coming into a facility, especially a global facility, there's just snakes and spiders and rats and all kind of critters, possums and raccoons. So you do see them all. And I think that we could talk about the weirdness of that all day long, and I think Scott did that really, really well. But the real diagnostic, as I was listening to us talk about this, isn't whether this kind of weird thing is going to happen. Probably most of us have had this weird thing happen, and it happens in complex operations quite often. I think my lesson out of this, Monica, is how does an organization respond to something like this? Do leaders treat kind of these anomalies with curiosity, or do we just dismiss them and call the pest control right person? Because I think I've done both of those things, right? Let's call pest control and get this situation stopped. Does the investigation stop at human error, or do we dig into the conditions, right, to make sure vendors are sending this in, clean raw materials when it's possible to do that? Do we get the front line involved, asking them these questions? Because, to Scott's point, a brown recluse or a black recluse, that's a fairly, dangerous hazard to deal with. And it would absolutely be a recordable or a reportable incident had a bite happen. So is it a management exercise? Do we treat it just purely from an EHS, perspective? But the lesson I got, from that as I listened to you both talk is weird when we explain weird things away, we minimize them or we just bury them in generic corrective action. And I think that, yeah, spider events have happened probably to all of us. How did we really treat that? There's some learning there to take away.
Scott, something that you said triggered this thought with me too and that is our ability to respond as practitioners. And I think some of it comes a little bit with
Yeah.
age, but I think it also comes with the flexibility that we build into our emergency response plans or our incident response plans, that we don't get them so regimented that it's only for this type of an event or that type of an event, but it allows you to flex and respond to
Yeah.
that unusual. And, it in
Mhm.
my career, I think the unusual, when work doesn't go as planned or something happens or the weather impacts us, those unusual pressures that are put upon us is when we really have to be at our best because
Yeah.
that's when the serious incidents can occur.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm actually very curious how that debrief went the next morning. And if they did have to file the report, like what did they say? It was a spider and how that was handled. But no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's absolutely important to be prepared for the unexpected because it always happens. Um, and yeah, it just echoing what I said before, it just highlights the importance of inspections and staying on top of it and just being prepared for what you don't even think is going to happen. Um, all
Well,
right.
I've got a weird and wacky one. If
Sure.
I think that this really needs to get weird and wacky, so I have one of those. I actually have two, but I'll just start with this one. If we have time, I'll share the next one. But and I won't name where I was, but it was a large operation, had about 700 employees at it. About 30 acres surrounded this site, and most of the land was fenced around the perimeter of the manufacturing facility, but the rest of it was open. So we just basically placarded, put signs up saying, please don't trespass, all those kind of things. But we did have roads that intersected our own property. So this actually happened and back in the day, and Scott has done this too, is that you had safety and you had environmental work and you also had security as a part of your role, and security happened to fall into my responsibility. So one day I get a call from a security guard, at our main security office and said, "We just had an incident. I need you to come out." And I said, "Well, what's the incident?" I think it was on a Saturday, so I was home, and they said, "Well," said there was a couple that decided to picnic down by the river, but along the fence line of our property. And they were drinking alcohol, right? So they both were intoxicated, and they decided that it would be a great idea to target shoot. So they got out a gun, and somehow this man talked his girlfriend into putting a can on top of her head, and he was going to shoot the can off the top of her head, and he missed. He missed and literally shot her in the top of the head and killed her on our property, on our plant property. And how I learned about this is the young man felt so bad that he was looking for help, so he comes over to our security office, basically turns himself in, gives us the gun, and said, that he did all of this by mistake because he was intoxicated. So how do you take all of that in? How do you take all of that in over the phone? So I immediately went out, and the person was still in the security office when I got there. I could tell he was very remorseful. I could tell he was very intoxicated. But believe it or not, he was charged with manslaughter and actually went to prison because of that event. So talking about weird and wacky, that may be the weirdest and wackiest thing that I've ever had to manage. But it did bring about a lot of change, about how we maintain security of the property, who we allowed on, who we allowed off-site. We increased security patrols, right, to make sure that no one was on our property at those times, and we enlarged the fence line. So a lot of those things, right, you would think, well, I don't have to do that. No one's actually going to go down to the river and get intoxicated. But when you think about that from a pure fun standpoint, well, those things kind of sound attractive, right? To be able to sit by the river and have a picnic. You just don't expect the rest of it to kind of evolve. So that is my weirdest and maybe wackiest. And I've got one more, but I'll stop there. Maybe Scott has one to share.
Oh, I don't think I can top that. And I
No.
would love to hear the next one. Scott, when things like that happen, though, I, oftentimes management will then start to respond to us, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And we get more funding, or we get more whatever it is, more fencing in your case. I think to what happened with COVID, and how none of us had ever dealt with a pandemic, unless, well, maybe you had with the flu of 18
Sure.
1918,
Yeah,
but
that is
uh
true.
yeah.
I was prepared.
Not to date
But
you.
so you were the one EHS professional who was truly prepared, because going through the flu epidemic. But it just changes the way operations and management sometimes looks at what we do.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So let's hear the
Absolutely.
next one.
Yeah, let's hear
I'm
it.
kind of digging to see if I can one
I
up you here. I'm
yeah,
struggling.
honestly, this one happened at the same location. We were building the facility, so it was a greenfield site, right? A lot of land around me, a lot of contractors on site. I call this one Dog the Bounty Hunter. Is that another event, right? That where the security guards called, and I was on the plant site at that day, and they said we have a man that's at the fence. He's come through the gate, and he did. He charged through the gate with his vehicle. He broke our gate down, and he's standing at the entrance of the construction gate, demanding to see and employ a subcontractor that was, and he was waving a gun. So you can imagine, right? I called the police. I get things going from that perspective, and then I go out to the job site to figure out what this was all about. He's still there. He's put away his gun, but he wants everyone to know that he has it, and he's looking for one employee and a subcontractor. And we find that person, and somehow this man talks that subcontractor into his vehicle, and they take off before the police ever arrive. So now I've got the police working on this. I think this man's been kidnapped. I don't know what's going on. Come to find out, it was a bounty hunter with a warrant to to actually arrest that person, and he was totally. And I didn't know this. He was totally within his legal right to do what he did, with the exception of crossing into the gate of our work site. So there was a little bit of trouble that happened because of that. But I learned a tremendous amount that day about Dog the Bounty Hunter and what he or she can or can't do if they've got a warrant in their hand to bring a person to justice. But that happened. That absolutely happened. So that may be right up there with the two weirdest things that have ever occurred to me on my watch.
I don't even know what to say to that.
No, there's nothing.
That's crazy. Like what how does your company recover from that? Like what is the lesson? Like what do you tell your team?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot. I didn't know such things actually. I think I watched Dog the Bounty Hunter once or twice on TV, so I kind of thought how it worked. I don't think I ever thought it could happen locally, and it did. And I learned a couple of things. If the bounty is high enough, right? If there is a bounty reward high enough, there are people that are designated to find you and they will find you. I have found that the workplace is not the safe place for you to be, and I have found that a warrant works regardless to where you are. So those are a couple of things that I took away. I think what we did do is to improve our security measures to reflect that, right? Is that we didn't even have a section in policy about this even being able to be, a chance to happen. I even had to call the corporate security team to find out if we even had a policy such as this. We did not, right? So we actually had to make new corporate policy to reflect some of these changes, how to deal with those type of things. I think a couple of things that I learned socially is how people reacted, so we lost a little bit of control with a security team that was unarmed trying to deal with somebody that was armed, right? So we had to de-escalate that pretty quickly, which we did. But I guess there was a lot of learning to always be prepared for the things that you would not think could happen, right? So it does require us. I think what it does is we've got to do a better job of benchmarking what great looks like when it comes to security or what the most forward-thinking idea is in how we protect the work site. You can always back down, right? I think you've got to know. I think one of the things that I enjoy about using Chat GPT to outline things that I want to understand better, there's always these two or three things that I did not think about, right? And I think that that's kind of what feels in here is that, well, what are those two or three things that you are not thinking about in protecting your work site for safety or environmental or even, security in this case?
I was going to ask you about that because it seems like maybe, we go in with a confirmation bias that, hey, this guy's
Yeah.
a bad guy because he's coming in, he's looking for one individual. I mean, my first thoughts is, oh my God, he's going to kill the
Yeah.
guy,
Me
right?
too.
He's messed with his wife or whatever the case might be.
I've got those
And,
stories too.
and
Yeah.
yeah, well, I think that's a different podcast.
Yeah,
But
it is.
you, you know, I just wonder if that would happen to you again, if you would be much, much nicer to the guy to share in the bounty, as a possibility,
Yeah,
or
right.
get a little
I can
cut.
find him for you.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the gun before he left, but everyone that saw the gun said it was a really big gun. So
That's what
they,
matters.
they it was right. It certainly set the precedent of how we were going to deal. But that one ranks right up there of weird and wacky things that have happened.
Probably long-barreled pistol that look like
Let's
the
hope.
guys that do the Miami towing or whatever the show is on TV where they
I think it was
load,
more
load
like Clint
anything.
Eastwood, kind of a
Yeah.
Clint
Oh,
Eastwood kind of a look. Yeah.
I need to know what did the guy do to justify such a reaction?
Yeah, well, he had skipped bail, so he was
Oh,
put in bail for a serious offense. I don't really know what the serious offense was, but the bounty was pretty high, so he was
wow.
bailed out. The way this works, right, is that you're bailed out by a bail bondsman, and if you don't pay that money back, then of course you're just free game to to poach, and that's what happened here. Is that the bounty was high enough that somebody decided that it was worth going after. And that's really how these bounties work, is that you've got bounty hunters, almost like we do, now with trailering, things across the country. Well, that bounty's high enough. I'm going to go find this person, and it's kind of the way it happens. It's all electronic now, so you don't really even have to go to a bail bondsman to figure it out. it's all on the web. So yeah, yeah.
Wow, it's quite the story. Well, I
The
have
Yeah,
things you
one
learn
more.
on this podcast are amazing, right?
yeah.
That's what we do it for, some lessons. Now, if people ever come across the situation at their workplace, they're gonna know what to do.
They'll know who to call. They'll call
Call
Scott Gerard.
Scott.
They'll call
Let's call
Scott. Yep.
Scott. He's got
Scott
that
Gerard.
Listen.
policy.
Scott. You know,
Okay.
Scott, I was thinking of some weird things, and this one's not a happy story, but
Mm.
I was working for a company, and we were in the uh, emergency services type industry. I don't want to get too specific here for fear of offending somebody, but we were just trending the wrong way. You just started seeing
Hmm.
a pattern of deviation from normal, from standardized work. And I went to the operations lead and said, "Hey, I'd really like to have a little stand down, just a short one. I know we're here to respond to the public when they have emergencies. I'd like to just have 15 minutes and just get
Yeah,
everybody to settle for a minute." And I got the lecture that, well, you don't understand operations, you don't understand what we do, you don't understand how we're mission critical. And I'm sure other practitioners that are listening to the podcast today have all been in that position. And I let it go. And 24 less than 24 hours later, I got a call from the operations center from the dispatch that said, "Hey, we've just had an accident. We've lost touch with one of our units,
Oh
and
no.
two of the three crew members died in the
Mm.
accident."
Oh my. Wow.
Yeah, and I we're telling funny stories today, and again, I don't want to be a downer, but those stories and that little guy that gets up on your shoulder is so critical. And I think it's one of the
Yeah.
reasons AI will never replace us, Scott. And I know you've done a whole bunch of research and publications on AI, but I think that's listening to that little guy on your shoulder,
Yeah.
drawing
Hmm.
from experiences from others, I think is so critical, because these aren't always black swan events that we're talking about here. These
That's right.
happen. These happen all the time, and trust your instincts.
Yeah, I think, I'm sure Monica's going to be shutting us down here before long, right? But I think Scott, you said something I think that just kind of spurs me right to say these is that weird things themselves are often a signal of drift, right? We've seen some drift in the process, and they reveal a gap of how we imagine work, right? So if
Hmm.
I could imagine work, I would have said, well, shooting someone on our property is not going to happen, or coming across a security gate is not going to happen. So what procedures say should happen, and then work as done, what actually happens could be two different things, right? So I think that for me, it's always kind of be prepared. They really expose what I've always called latent conditions, right? These unexpected interactions between system elements and these workarounds that we always try to employ in the work that we do. And I often talk about this normalization of deviance as well. I'm just going to accept, that deviance as normal, in the work environment. And those are all weak signals, right? So and Sidney Decker, I think he said that best in a lot of his publications, is that being resilient, in the work environment means looking at all of these weak signals, whether it's a spider, whether it's an exploding pair of safety eyewear, or a guy picnicking on the side of a river, right? They're just precursors that in hindsight tell us something more, right, about things that could happen, right? And I don't want to go overboard and say, well, you really got to plan for everything, but you do have to do a healthy set of diagnostics of what could happen, right, if we allow too loose of control to happen. Really, and Scott and I, we've always led complex operations. So the more complex operations are, you can bet that the more of these weird, wacky things could happen, right? So I think that would be my lesson is that, look for drift. Where am I seeing drift? Where am I thinking that we've got full control versus what's really happening, right?
I'm guessing, Scott, that the episode with William Tell at the river was not the
Yeah.
first time somebody had picnicked
Nope.
on the
Nope.
property, and
Not at
and it
all.
just kind of well, they're not hurting anything. It's a beautiful area, but they're way out of the way. The yellow gear that's prepping the sites never going to impact them. They're not impacting us. Let's just let it be. And
That's
and then
right.
just yeah.
It's exactly right. Is that we just decided not to monitor that area because it was beautiful. It was a nice area, and we actually mowed that area. So we took care of that area because at times the employees would go down to that area and have lunch. But we definitely didn't gate it. We definitely didn't control it to outside interest. And in hindsight, I knew people were going down there to picnic or to fish or whatever they wanted to do. But so lesson learned. Lesson learned from that wild and wacky thing that happened.
Take some target practice before you go picnicking. That's my lesson learned.
Exactly. Yeah. Leave the bud at home. Leave the bud at home. So,
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a great lesson. And I think that's a good way to wrap up today's podcast, which is the weirdest workplace incidences that you've probably never heard of. I did have one story, but I'll just summarize it in a sentence. It was a employee who thought he had severe chemical burns, but it actually ended up being a leaking crate of ultra concentrated hot sauce. So
wow.
what all of these stories have in common is that incidences don't always have to be these dramatic disasters. I mean, sometimes you shoot your girlfriend in the head, and that's a whole different story. But
Dramatic.
sometimes you have a spider that tempers with your security. Whatever it may be, the smallest, strangest, most unexpected events reveal gaps in training, communication systems. And I think that's where we learn, adapt, and we make our workplaces safer. So if there's one thing to remember, I think it's just stay curious, stay observant, never underestimate the lessons in the what the heck just happened moment. And just continue to improve, like both of you had shared with your stories. It's despite the weirdness, there was something good that came out of it, whether it was more security or better protocol or better PPE. I think there's always something to be learned. Scott, anything you want to finish off with?
I think you summarized it very well. I appreciate the time today. And Scott, as always, I'll always enjoy interacting with you. And Monica, again, thanks for hosting us today.
Yep.
Amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both. And thank you for listening to the Safety Brief. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.